Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the web interview series that we host at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. My name is Deva Rangarajan and I'm the director of the Sales Center out here. And today I am privileged to actually have Elay Cohen, who is an expert on sales enablement and is the CEO and co-founder of a company called SalesHood, which is making a lot of splash. And recently, if you go take a look at what they're doing, they're looking at analytics in sales enablement and what is all this, and that's pretty much what we're going to be talking to Elay right now. And Elay has a lot of history, who's worked in Oracle and held very senior positions at Salesforce, and now he started his company, and he's also a best-selling author of 2 books, and one of the books which had a profound impact on me was a book on Enablement Mastery. And he talks a lot about sales enablement and how a lot of organizations need to take the learnings from this book when they need to look at their sales force and how can get their sales forces to improve their performances while keeping their costs under control. Elay, thank you once again. I know that you're a very busy man.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Elay, and one of the things, so essentially we hear a lot about, again, from a sales academics perspective, I hear a lot about the concept of sales enablement and everything else. And I saw different versions of it saying that sales enablement is supposed to be helping during the sales process itself. That was my initial thought about it. And reading your book, I just realized it's much more than that. So can you give a little bit of a heads up on how this concept of sales enablement came into the business world today?
You know, I want to go back in time. Well, before I say that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be sharing, and thanks for reading my book, and thank you for the nice words. It means a lot to me, and it's great to have someone with your background and stature and knowledge kind of really digging into the book and figuring out how we can, you know, amplify the message, because sales enablement, I think, is a big, and enablement is a big driver of growth for organizations when it's embraced by teams. And you know, sales enablement or enablement for me means the alignment of people, processes, and priorities, with the goal of achieving amazing business results. And going back in time to 2005, 2006, the early days of Salesforce, you know, that was really the genesis of sales enablement as a discipline. And, you know, getting pulled into the office of Mark Benioff and being asked to review a corporate pitch presentation with the ultimate aim of understanding the pitch, understanding the message, and then teaching all of our sellers, all of our customer-facing employees how to deliver the same message exactly the way that Mark delivered it. That's messaging alignment. That's alignment. That's the beginnings of sales enablement, and that's what happened, right? Benioff takes us through the presentation, slide by slide, myself, head of sales, you know, the president, head of marketing, and says, this is the way we need everybody to speak about Salesforce, about how we win, about how we deliver value. And it's the ultimate in brand alignment across every conversation. And that's really the vision. And Mark taught us. Mark taught us the importance of sales enablement. And for us, sales enablement was done with brute force, coaching, one-to-one coaching, certifying, role-playing. And we used to run around the world and certify people, coach them, train them, make sure they're on message. And we did that with every one of Mark's corporate pitch presentations. We did it with the sales process. We did it with competitive battle cards. We did it with our product training. And sales enablement as a discipline was really the driver for the amazing growth that we saw at Salesforce, from 300 million to 3 billion in sub 8 years. It was done. It was fueled by sales enablement, and the alignment happened from CEO down to every manager, down to every seller, down to every conversation. That's the genesis of sales enablement.
And it's very, very interesting. And I love the fact that good things happen in threes. That's what I've seen. And you have 3 things. You talk about your people, you talk about your process, and you talk about the priorities. Elay, one of the things for me is that where do you think strategy fits in? Because all of the things that we talk about, it has got to do with the strategy of the firm. So is your assumption that given the strategy of a firm, we need to focus on the other 3s? And why didn't you focus on that part? I know that it sort of trickles in the different things that you have, but why didn't you also talk about strategy? Was it to keep it to the 3, or I was really curious about that part.
Great question. And inside the process, there is a pillar inside of the process. We created an enablement process map. And the first pillar of the enablement process map is go-to-market alignment.
Yeah.
Inside go-to-market alignment is strategy. And without strategy, everything falls down. And so, but I'm a people first person. That's why the 3 pillars of enablement are people, process, and priorities. And then within process, there's the enablement process map. And then the enablement process map has go-to-market alignment. And in go-to-market alignment, that's where we're going to have a strategy and make sure that the strategy is grounded in metrics and KPIs. Make sure that the strategy has clear motion, clear processes, and yeah, there might be a little bit of a presumption that the company does have a business strategy and that we are executing the business strategy. But if that business strategy isn't documented, that's why when you get to the process of enabling people, if it's not grounded in strategy with metrics and KPIs, then we're going to end up, having what we call in the book bad sales enablement, right? Yeah. You can enable people, but if it doesn't have a strategy and if it doesn't have a brand message, if it doesn't have, the right, if you're not enabling people in the right things, then, you're going to have a negative effect on the business. So I appreciate your comment on strategy. Yes, I think it's interesting. I'm presuming it. Then when we get to the middle section, the enablement process map,
Indeed.
You can't get to training, you can't get to onboarding, you can't get to communications, you can't get to improving buyer engagement, you can't get to celebrating results unless you've got a clear documentation of the strategy.
Indeed. And I think, thank you for clarifying, because, well, when I was reading it, that's what eventually I thought, wait a minute, here is a strategy part. Here is the go-to-market strategy where you talk about it. And I love that. We'll get to that in just a minute when you talk about your process. And I'm an ex-engineer, so for me, everything goes with processes. So I like the fact that you have a process, because the reason why for me was interesting is that you do not mention it is, when you start initially, when you talk about people, right? When you talk about people and you talk about Mark Benioff having this forceful presence of trying to make sure, but he had a strategy in his head saying, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to be known for. And kind of the strategy manifests itself in different reasons as to why we focus on people deciding to change, and then the process map. So that's pretty much why I was curious to see why you put it out there. But let's then go back. So essentially I have a lot of questions, but in the limited time that we have, I'm going to look at some of those questions which I thought were kind of brilliant in terms of insights. Right? That's according to me. Right? And
well, you're too kind.
No, but I think it was really wonderful. Reading the book, I said, here is another book. And I'll be honest, here is another book. And then I was sitting in a plane and I was reading it. I couldn't put it down. And that was something that is, again, proof of what you've written and how you've said it very, very clear. For once, it's a good book with clear kind of, this is what you need to be doing, rather than saying very high level and not going into depth. So that's one of the things that I really took away. Let me go into the first one. You talk about, I have some notes here, so if you don't mind. Yep. So you talk about the people, process, priorities, and everything else. In the people part, I love the fact you talk about organizational design. You talk about organization, because too many times I get this question, where should sales enablement be? And you very clearly, and I love the answer, that it's not a straightforward answer, that you say there's a legacy to every organization. So can you give me a little bit of a heads up about what should companies be thinking about when they look at organizational design, and why is it in the people part of your book?
Yeah, no, great question. I did a keynote this week at a conference, and where I kind of explained certain aspects of the book, and I created a slide for the org design. And the slide is an org chart, and the org chart has the divisions of a company: sales, marketing, and HR, and the different departments at the top, CEO, and then there's a line to sales enablement, and then underneath sales enablement are the pillars inside of the sales enablement team. And I drew a dotted line from the sales enablement pillar up to the various different departments, because as you read in the book, it depends, right? Where sales enablement as a discipline, as a group, as people lives, depends on the maturity of the company. It depends on where power is in the company. It depends on where content comes from in the company. It depends on where power needs to be in the company. And if you've got a strong sales enablement leader that has a strong team, the enablement team could actually augment a leader and help them be better. And I'll give you some examples, but I created that slide, and actually, if you go to my Twitter, you can see there's an image of that slide on my Twitter feed, so I can share it with anyone. But that picture of that slide everybody in the audience was taking a picture of it. You can tell it's a good slide when that camera goes up and everybody's taking pictures of it, because it's a really important question. So you picked a question that I think people are struggling with.
Indeed.
People think sales enablement need to be in sales. And for me, when I started in the enablement team, when I took over the enablement team in 2006 back at Salesforce, initially sales enablement lived in marketing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it lived. And there was an alignment between the goals that we needed sales enablement to do and what the marketing goals were. And within a month or two, we moved it into sales.
Yeah.
And so, and that was a healthy conversation. It made sense. It was rational. The marketing team at that exact moment in time was really focused on demand gen, on brand marketing, on corporate events. And the marketing team and the sales team was really focused on hiring, and we needed to reduce time to ramp, and we really needed to drive a tighter connection between the hiring process and the ramping and the onboarding process and the success of the teams, both at headquarters and in the hubs and in regions. And so it made sense. And we had a nice partnership because we made the move, but content was going to continue to come from the marketing team. So we had an explicit agreement that said the playbooks, the corporate pitch decks would come from marketing, and then the execution of it, the coaching of it. So think about the story with Mark. Mark, would deliver the pitch deck to us. He had the strategy, and then my team did the execution of the coaching. And so the marketing team was just Mark's vision at scale. Yeah. And so, fast forward a few years, what I see companies today, as companies are in their trajectory of growth and they're maturing, companies, in the 0 to 100 million range, sales enablement will live in sales because they're moving fast and then they're agile and they really need to focus on the metrics and the goals and the impacts of the business, the sales impacts. But as companies get beyond 100 million, you can begin to explore where it should move. And I'll use Alteryx as an example, and I highlight Alteryx in the book as well. They moved sales enablement from underneath sales and sales ops directly into HR because they wanted to drive this culture of coaching and just-in-time learning and social learning and peer-to-peer and the amazing impact that the sales enablement team had on the sales organization. The CEO said, let's now take this and let's apply this to the whole company. And so it made sense to move it. And it doesn't mean that not delivering value to sales. They're just applying the best practices. It's a very fascinating concept.
Absolutely.
I love the idea that sales is teaching HR how to be modern in their approach to developing great teams. Let me pause there and let you just kind of ask me another question back.
Yeah, indeed. No, I think it's great because you said something which is very, very interesting, because when you have this transition of what we could say responsibilities from one department to the other, so from sales moving on to that, you're going to have a lot of resistance to change. And that's what I like about the people part, where you say about buy-in, getting buy-in at different levels. So for me, the way I interpret it, so am I right in interpreting that the fact that buy-in occurs at different levels? If you work in an organization where you have a very, very finance-oriented CEO who's not necessarily interested in all these, you need to get buy-in at the top level about why you need to be doing this. Then you need to get buy-in at the lowest denominator, because if that doesn't happen, you're going to have a bunch of content created by marketing, and that's what I hear all the time, and salespeople go and reinvent the wheel all the time. So what are your thoughts on that part about the concept of buy-in?
Well, absolutely. You need buy-in, right? And so hence I start the story with Mark Benioff to demonstrate that you need CEO buy-in. I reinforce the story with Alteryx and Dean Stoker, CEO buy-in. And then you need to look at the next layer of leadership, and you need buy-in from the head of sales, head of marketing. And so there's a case to be made that enablement should live in marketing if you don't necessarily have buy-in from the CMO. And therefore, if I'm CEO of a company or I'm CRO and I'm not getting what I need from marketing, then rather than fight the battle, give them sales enablement and say, you own it. You're responsible. I'm going to hold you accountable for the metrics. And that's how you get buy-in. And you know what, organizations that aren't getting what they need from marketing, rather than, battle it, just give them sales enablement. That's a great way to, and hold them accountable, measure them on it. And because you're right, salespeople and sales teams and sales managers, they're going to continue to say, we're not getting what we need from marketing. Well, I'll argue that maybe marketing doesn't know what you need. And maybe marketing hasn't been coached and trained to build the right playbooks and to build the right tools. So why don't we take our best people in sales enablement and let's move them into marketing? If you look at traditional product marketing from a marketing discipline perspective, and if you just assume, there's pillars of what makes a great marketer and then what makes a great product marketer, sales enablement and enabling your teams, getting your salespeople ready, that in old school, before sales enablement emerged, that was really a product marketing function. And let's just not forget that in business, that, that's why you can live in a variety of different places. Does that make sense? What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things which I said when I first looked at enablement, and I remember the term when you came across the term integrated marketing communication, IMC.
Right.
And IMC was just, initially when I took a look at it, I said IMC is just the new version of sales enablement. That is, sales enablement is marketing in a typical B2B firm, where in my experience, if I go ask a B2B company what is marketing, I hear things like marketing is a black hole, money goes in, nothing comes out. Marketing spends all the money that we work so hard to bring in. That's what I've heard. But then you start looking at your book and you start saying how it can be done. It is absolutely right that you need to have a kind of an idea about a coordinated communication. But if it's going to be in marketing or in sales, if they're not held jointly accountable, you're not going to have buy-in in each, and you're going to have the same issues. And I think I like the fact that by giving marketing in those organizations where they don't have it, you're making them responsible for sales metrics. And now suddenly they have to start working together with sales. And that is something that I think is very, very interesting. So that's what I thought.
I was just getting a little more juice into my laptop. I was realizing I was running out of battery.
Absolutely. And I'm getting some juice to my
you get some water juice. My co-founder, Arthur, come say hello, Arthur. Here's my co-founder.
Arthur, so I'm just a faculty member at a business school. Yeah, so.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just, if you were wondering what I was doing.
Elay, my next question is.
Thank you.
My next question is about your processes, right? I think I can talk forever about the processes, but my best takeaway from that was the enablement process map. I suggest everybody out there who gets a chance to see this, if you're going to buy the book, it's available on Amazon, go buy the book. But I think the one that you should put on your walls is the enablement process map. And I absolutely love it. I love it to the point where it starts from your go-to market in the end here, but you don't forget the customer engagement. And tell me a little bit more about customer, because the customer engagement that you have is still from my side as a supplier. But tell me, how can you start involving the customers as well? Because if you don't get the engagement of the customers, nothing's going to work. So right now, there's a big term about the concept of buyer enablement, right? The idea of sales enablement is to enable your buyer so much that it makes it easier for the customer to choose you. So tell me a little bit more on the customer engagement from your thought process.
I'm always looking for feedback, and the word customer/buyer is a word that I went back and forth with. And, engagement, enablement, I think the net result is the same. We need to make sure that our customer-facing employees, anyone, and that's why I put the word customer there, because I didn't want people to think it was just in the buying process. It's also in the ongoing process of delivering value. So it could be someone in customer success. It could be someone, anyone, any employee. And so for me, the idea that we were aligning our teams on our go-to-market, and then we were going to then, based on our go-to-market, based on our capacity, based on our processes, based on our metrics, our KPIs, we're going to build the appropriate learning, onboarding, training, make it just in time, and then we're going to communicate, and then we're going to provide additional resources, additional tools, additional collaboration. We're going to involve our customers across every step in the buyer's journey, not just prospecting, not just selling, not just closing, but also in what happens afterwards in their success. Really, I emphasize that in the book because, all too often, enablement turns into checkbox enablement where, we'll run a training, we'll do a webinar, we'll fly people around, we'll certify them, we'll coach them, we'll assess them, but then we're not going back and we're not staying with them during the process. And I want to make sure that that we're reinforcing our go-to-market at the appropriate time in the sales process, and then we're checking back after the sales process to make sure that our customers are happy, that our buyers are happy, that we're renewing the business, that we're growing the business. So in a modern world where subscription, in the subscription economy, where customers are not necessarily customers for life, because you can lose a customer. So a bad experience, right? A bad experience between a customer and a salesperson, or a customer and a customer support person, or whoever, a bad experience during anything there, if we're not enabling that, we can lose we can not only win a customer for life, but we can lose a customer for life. So I just wanted to be mindful about that in the context of enablement. And then we close the loop with the process map, with measuring results, celebrating successes, correlating all that activity with attainment, and ultimately driving success. So yeah, I think, but I'm torn, right? Should that word be buyer or customer? I went back and forth a bunch of times on that, buyer enablement, but ultimately for this book, we went with customer engagement.
And I think it's as long as the way I read the book is that you've thought this through. So for me, that's the most important thing. It's not that you neglected it. So that's the first key thing. Terminology, you can go about buyer engagement or customer engagement. The key is that we need to be together with the customer, listening to their needs, what they're saying and what they're not saying. That's my opinion on this. The reason why I'm saying this is that, and that's something that I recently, in the last year and a half, I remember doing a training program and having a bunch of people in front of me, and I saw one title which was called Customer Success. And as usual, like a typical academic, my eyes rolled over. I said, here is another fancy word for account management. And then, and the more we started talking to them, the more I realized, no, it's not as easy or simple as it is, because most customer journeys, if you take a look at everything, has been focused on up to the point where you get the sale. But the point is, most of the things happen up to, not at the point of sale, but also what happens after that when you actually deliver on your promises. And that's pretty much where you say is that, and the ability to proactively manage that process and engage with the customers, be it with whatever title you want, be it with an account manager, be it with the customer success. And the more I talk about it, the more I realize it's customer success, because your account managers have other things to do. And we actually started a research project where we've interviewed 120 customer success managers. And it's very interesting because the term that they use a lot is land and expand.
Yeah.
But I always thought landing was up to sales enablement, land the customer and then hand it over to customer success. But the way they define land and expand is interesting. They say landing is truly when the value that was promised by the salesperson is actually delivered, so that the customer has proof of value delivered.
Yeah.
You use that, you engage with the customers proactively. And I think the customer success role, the testimony of that is to take a look at how many number of jobs you have on LinkedIn for people in customer success. It's enormous. And we are actually doing a project. My previous interview was with a company called Bolstra, which is a small startup, which is a customer success startup, where we discuss the concept of customer success. So I think the concept of customer engagement should not stop at the point where you get the customer, and because you tend to either win a customer for life or lose a customer for life based on how well you engage with them, deliver on all the promises that you've made. Because in today's day and age, if you don't do it, they're going to take to social media and complain about you. And that's not something that you want. And I think in the interest of time, I still want to get your thoughts on two more things. Which
Perfect.
Is actually
I'm enjoying this conversation. Absolutely. It's fun. Thank you for the great question.
And the last one is priorities. I think if I had more time, I would pretty much have you on for 2 hours, 3 hours straight on the process map, the enablement process map, because that's how much I love that part. But we'll come to.
So we actually have started. We have an enablement mastery accreditation that we're working on that basically takes the enablement process map, and we go through it over 6 months with people. So that's something we can talk about as well afterwards.
Absolutely, indeed.
But you're right. It's more. We can do more than hours.
Absolutely.
It's a long journey.
It's one of the things which you really talk about, and I love this part about in priorities, and you talk about manager enablement. Too many times I see companies, well, I've been part of training their salespeople, but I always ask them, what about your sales managers? Now, I'm not talking about all the things that you talk about. I'm just talking of basic sales training. And then what about sales management training? What you're talking of is sales management training and hyperdrive. But I'm talking about the fact you stress on manager enablement. Why do you think that is important, and what do you think is preventing companies to focus on that?
Right. My first book is all about managers. It's actually a book written for frontline managers, and I believe today that we have many frontline managers and even VP second line managers that have never been formally trained and coached on how to develop their people, how to have tough conversations, how to provide the right coaching that their people need so they can be successful. And the problem is bigger than I anticipated 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I was spoiled at Salesforce. We had a lot of good managers and a lot of good leadership, and there was that layer of the business was top notch in the industry. And when I left, I was surprised to find out how behind most companies were in the development of their leadership layer of their frontline managers. So, and then as we rolled out the platform, the technology, as we worked with customers, and we want to really impress upon the importance of bringing managers into the journey of onboarding and, what's their role. It doesn't matter what system you give a manager. There's so many great systems and technologies out there. You can give them, if they don't fundamentally know, technology aside, how to develop their people, how to ask developmental questions, how to develop their people, how to not go in and win a deal, but how to help their people win a deal, then they're never going to be able to develop their people. So I decided to devote a whole chapter to the discipline of just manager enablement and manager coaching, because it's that important.
Indeed.
If companies only implemented that one program, they would see a dramatic lift in the results of their teams. And we've seen the data, the connection between managers that are good at developing their people, and that's measured by good coaching, activity-based coaching, real-time, just-in-time coaching. When we can see that data in our platform, the connection between that data and outcomes is overwhelmingly direct. And so therefore it inspired me to devote a chapter. And then we look at companies in that chapter that we mentioned, Sage Intact, they've been able to achieve great results because they're investing in developing their people. And that's why.
And I think and I think for me that was a must-read chapter as well, because that's one of the things that people forget, and it's good because that keeps me relevant. That makes me sure that I have a job of training sales managers. So it's great. But I'm glad that you talked about this, because that's something that, from my experience, we do not have too many companies focus on sales management. The idea is they would spend so much money on bringing the salespeople in and do the training. And then when you ask about sales managers, they would say, well, they have an individual budget, they can do whatever they want. And most of the time you ask them, how much money did you spend on that? They say, we didn't have the time. Oh, I read a book and that's it. So I think that is one of the things which I think is very, very relevant. And Elay, today that's pretty much all the time we have for, but I'm hoping that we will continue this conversation both offline, but also I want to do a session with you on SalesHood, and specifically on maybe on the enablement process map, because I think that's such a critical part of what you're doing, and we will discuss this as well.
We have a nice long future of collaboration ahead of us. Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, everyone, we would like to thank Elay Cohen again, and I guess based on what we just heard, it's not going to be the last one. We're going to have him more. Thank you again for tuning in. My next speaker is going to be another enablement expert called Tamara Schenk, who works for CSO Insights, part of Miller Hyman Global, and she'll also be sharing her insights into more on what Elay also touched upon right now. Thank you once again.